Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into the life of a leader who, well, let's just say he had a pretty dramatic change of heart.
Oh, yeah. Talking about Ashoka the Great, right? From
Yes.
fearsome conqueror to, like, the poster child for peace.
Exactly. Reigned in India from 268 to 232 BCE, built this huge empire, but also really pushed for peace and what he called Dharma.
Yeah, his story is fascinating. It's like, how do you go from being known for brutality to promoting nonviolence
Hmm.
and still manage a giant empire? It's a puzzle.
Right. And that's exactly what I want to unpack today. We've got your research here, and I'm especially interested in the military side of things and how he managed it all. Like, how do you reconcile being a pacifist with being an emperor?
It's a good question. I mean, we often think of Ashoka as this peaceful, almost saintly figure, but his early reign was pretty brutal, a lot of conquest, just like his grandfather, Chandragupta Maurya, who started the whole Mauryan dynasty thing.
So he kind of followed the family business at first?
Yeah, in a way, but then the Kalinga War happened. That was a real turning point.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. I saw it mentioned a lot in your notes. Seems like it was a big deal.
It was a decisive victory for Ashoka, but the sheer amount of death and destruction, it just messed him up, really shook him to his core.
Makes sense. A real wake-up call, I imagine.
It was, and that's what led him to Buddhism. It was like a total personal transformation, and it completely changed how he ruled.
Okay, so that explains this shift towards peace. But what about the military? Did he just disband the whole thing?
No, not at all. He wasn't naive. He knew he still needed a strong military. You can't rule a massive empire without some muscle, but he shifted the focus.
From attack to defense.
Exactly. Protecting his borders, keeping the peace within the empire. It was like he was building a shield around this vision he had of a quote-unquote Dharmic society.
You keep using this word dharma. What does that even mean?
It's a tricky one to define. It's this ancient Indian concept, and there are so many different interpretations. But for Ashoka, it was more than just religion. Think of it like a code of conduct, a way to live ethically.
So not just being a good Buddhist, but being a good person, period.
Exactly. And a good ruler, too. Dharma was woven into everything he did, his policies, how he treated people, and he didn't keep it to himself.
You're talking about those famous rock edicts of his, right? I've seen pictures. They're huge.
Yeah, they were everywhere, carved into rocks and pillars all across his empire. Imagine like a giant public announcement system.
Wow, that was smart. He was basically broadcasting his message to everyone. Most rulers back then probably just holed up in their palaces.
It was a brilliant strategy. He was connecting with his people directly, explaining his policies, encouraging them to live good lives, follow Dharma.
Talk about a PR campaign. He really was ahead of his time. But how effective were these messages? I mean, people back then didn't have smartphones. Did they even pay attention to these big rocks?
It's hard to say for sure, but the fact that he put them up everywhere and they were written in different languages suggests he was serious about reaching everyone.
It's like he was branding his whole empire with Dharma. But edicts aside, he must have been a pretty good administrator too, right? I mean, ruling that much land takes organization.
Absolutely. Ashoka was a master of organization. The empire was divided into provinces, each run by a governor who answered directly to him.
So pretty hierarchical. But did he just trust those governors to do the right thing? How could he make sure Dharma was actually happening out there in the provinces?
Well, this is where his Dharma Mahamatras come in. These were special officials appointed by Ashoka to promote Dharma.
Like a Dharma police force, making sure everyone was being good.
Not quite a police force, more like Latmoite emissaries of Dharma.
Okay, interesting. What exactly do they do?
They traveled around, settled disputes, made sure prisoners were treated fairly, all sorts of things to make Dharma a reality on the ground.
So like roving ambassadors of good governance, that's pretty innovative. I'm starting to get a sense of how he managed this massive empire. It was a combination of military strength, strategic administration, and this unwavering commitment to Dharma. But let's go back to the military reforms for a minute. You mentioned he shifted from conquest to defense. How did that work in practice?
Well, he understood that a strong military was still needed. You have to protect your borders, keep trade routes safe. But he wasn't interested in expansion anymore.
So strength through peace, projecting power through stability, not aggression.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about military might. He was also a skilled diplomat, built alliances with other kingdoms. He knew peace was essential for everything else he wanted to achieve.
It's almost like he was saying, I'm so well governed, no one's going to mess with me. Pretty clever strategy. But wasn't it risky? What if someone decided to test him?
Maybe. But it seems like he was pretty confident that his reputation for fairness, his commitment to Dharma, all of that would make him a tough opponent, even without constantly waging war.
It's a fascinating concept. But we can't just talk about the big picture stuff. What about the day-to-day running of the empire? What were some of the specific things that made his administration so effective?
Well, for one thing, he really understood the importance of communication. He had this network of messengers who could relay information quickly throughout the empire.
Like an ancient postal service.
Yeah, kind of. He also knew that infrastructure was key. He invested a lot in roads, bridges, irrigation systems, things that made life better for everyone and helped the empire run smoothly.
He was really building for the long term.
Exactly. And get this, he was also a pioneer in public health, set up hospitals even for animals. He understood that taking care of people was important for a strong empire.
Wow, that's incredible. A public health care system all the way back then. He was way ahead of his time. It's amazing to think that a ruler from over 2,000 years ago could be so forward-thinking.
Ashoka was truly a remarkable leader. His reign was a real turning point in Indian history. He showed that you could build a powerful empire without being a warmonger.
It's a powerful story. But let's be real, his reforms probably weren't universally loved. Someone must have pushed back. Change is hard.
You're right, you can't please everyone. And some people probably felt threatened by his focus on justice and equality.
Who would have resisted his changes the most?
Think about the people who benefited from the old system. Wealthy merchants, powerful landowners, maybe even some religious leaders who didn't like his emphasis on tolerance. Change always creates winners and losers.
That makes sense. And what about everyday people? Did everyone buy into his vision of a Dharmic society?
It's hard to say for sure. Some people probably loved the changes, especially those who benefited directly from his policies, but others were probably skeptical. Change can be scary.
Yeah, and even with the best intentions, it's probably impossible to implement these kinds of sweeping reforms perfectly across such a huge and diverse empire.
Definitely. You always have challenges with interpretation, enforcement. There's always the risk of corruption, human nature being what it is.
It's a good reminder that even the best leaders face limitations. But I'm still blown away by Ashoka's vision, his willingness to challenge the status quo.
Absolutely. He was a true visionary.
Well, I think this is a good place to pause and absorb everything we've discussed so far. We've covered a lot. Welcome back to our deep dive into Ashoka. We were just discussing his fascinating blend of military might and a focus on Dharma, but I'm still grappling with how he actually made Dharma happen. You mentioned his rock edicts, but was that all? Did he just, like, carve it in stone and hope for the best?
Oh, no. He was much more proactive than that. Ashoka knew Dharma couldn't just be a slogan. It had to be built into the system, into everyday life.
Okay, so how did he do that? How do you bridge the gap between, like, lofty ideals and reality?
Well, if you look at the edicts themselves, they offer some clues. It wasn't just about preaching. He laid out specific policies designed to improve people's lives. He was putting Dharma into action.
So, like what? Give me some examples. What kind of policies are we talking about?
Well, take healthcare. Ashoka understood that a healthy population was a strong population, so he set up hospitals and medical facilities all over the empire for both people and animals.
Whoa, a public healthcare system back then. That's incredible. Was that like a normal thing for rulers to do?
Not at all. It was totally revolutionary. It shows how he saw his role not just as a protector, but as someone responsible for the well-being of everyone in his empire.
That's a pretty big shift in thinking for that time. It's like he saw the bigger picture, how everything is connected.
Exactly. And it wasn't just healthcare. He was big on public works projects, too. Roads, wells, even planting trees along roads to provide shade for travelers.
That sounds more like something you'd see today, not in ancient India. What was the reasoning behind all that?
It was smart, really. These projects did a lot. They improved infrastructure, making trade and communication easier. They created jobs, and they showed people that he cared. It was Dharma made visible.
So it wasn't just talk, he was actually making people's lives better.
Exactly. He understood that for Dharma to mean anything, it had to have real-world impact.
This reminds me of something we talked about earlier, how Ashoka's empire was so strong internally. Were these public works projects also a way of maintaining that stability?
Absolutely. A happy population is less likely to rebel. By taking care of people's needs, he was strengthening the empire from the inside out.
He was like, take care of the people and they'll take care of you. Smart move.
Very smart. Ashoka's reign is a great example of how a leader can create a successful and stable society, not through force, but through compassion and actually caring about people.
It's pretty inspiring. But let's go back to this idea of Dharma for a minute. You said Ashoka was trying to weave it into the fabric of his empire.
Yeah.
How did that actually work? Was there some kind of Dharma rule book that everyone had to follow?
Well, there wasn't a literal rule book, but his edicts provided a framework for living a good life. He encouraged virtues like nonviolence, truthfulness, respecting your elders, being tolerant of different religions.
So it was more than just a set of rules. It was about cultivating a certain way of being.
Right. Ashoka knew that real change had to come from within. You can't just force people to be good.
But how do you create that kind of change on a societal level? That seems like a huge task.
Well, he used a multi-pronged approach. We talked about the edicts. Those were like his public service announcements. But he also had a more hands-on approach. Remember those Dharma Mahamatras we talked about?
Yeah, the Dharma ambassadors. Tell me more about them. Who were these people and how did they get chosen for this job?
We don't have all the details, unfortunately, but it seems like they were chosen for their good character, their deep understanding of Dharma, and their ability to teach and lead.
So, like a combination of a priest, a social worker, and a government official all rolled into one.
Yeah, kind of. They did all sorts of things, making sure prisoners were treated humanely, settling disputes, encouraging charity, basically making sure Dharma was happening in real life.
That's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
Did Ashoka worry about them abusing their power?
I'm sure he did. We don't know all the details about how he kept them in check, but his edicts stress fairness, impartiality, and accountability for all officials.
So he tried to create a system where everyone, even the Dharma guys, were answerable for their actions.
Exactly. Ashoka knew that if he wanted to build a society based on Dharma, he had to make sure everyone, especially those in power, were living up to those ideals.
It makes you think about the challenges of trying to lead with Dharma. It's not just about having good intentions. You have to figure out how to make it work in practice.
You're absolutely right, and that's what makes Ashoka such a fascinating figure. He wasn't just a dreamer, he was a doer. He took these lofty ideals and tried to make them real.
And he did it on a massive scale. But as you pointed out, it wasn't perfect. There must have been pushback, unintended consequences, that kind of thing.
Of course there were. No leader, no matter how great, can change everything overnight. And in the next part, we'll explore what happened after Ashoka, how his legacy lived on, how his ideas spread, and what we can learn from his successes, and yes, even his failures.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Ashoka. We've talked about all these incredible reforms, this vision of a society built on Dharma. But empires don't last forever. What happened to Ashoka's vision after he was gone?
It's a big question, right? What happens to these grand ideas after the person who championed them is gone? Well, the Mauryan Empire, it didn't last that much longer after Ashoka.
So it crumbled like so many empires before it.
Pretty much. Internal struggles, pressure from outside, it all adds up. But that doesn't mean Ashoka's ideas just vanished. Think about those rock edicts. They were still standing there.
Like silent reminders of a different way to rule? Did anyone even notice them after Ashoka was gone?
Oh yeah, they did. In India, those edicts became like a blueprint for good leadership. Rulers looked to them for guidance, trying to live up to Ashoka's ideals. Even today, he's considered a model ruler in India.
That's amazing. His impact is still felt thousands of years later.
It's a testament to the power of ideas. And his ideas didn't just stay in India, they spread.
How did that happen?
Trade routes, Buddhist monks, and scholars traveling around. Ashoka's vision, this idea of Dharma, it resonated with people all over Asia.
So he wasn't just influencing an empire, he was influencing a whole religion.
Exactly. And his impact goes beyond religion, too. Think about leaders who've embraced nonviolence.
Like Gandhi.
Exactly. Gandhi drew inspiration from Ashoka, and Martin Luther King Jr., too. Both of them, centuries and continents apart, saw something powerful in Ashoka's commitment to peace.
It's amazing to think about how those ideas traveled through time, influencing these huge movements for social change.
It shows you that what we do, the choices we make, they can have a ripple effect.
So as we wrap up our Ashoka deep dive, what are the big takeaways? What can we learn from him today?
Well, I think there are a few things that really stand out.
Hit me with some Ashoka wisdom.
First, the fact that he changed so much. He went from being this ruthless conqueror to a champion of peace. It shows us that anyone can change. It's never too late to choose a different path, to start doing good.
A message of hope for sure. What else?
His focus on Dharma. It reminds us that real leadership is about service, about using your power to help others. It's about ethics, about doing the right thing even when it's hard.
Leading with your heart, not just your ego.
Right. And finally, Ashoka's legacy shows us that ideas have power. His vision, this idea of a Dharmic society, it continues to inspire people today. It shows that we can make a difference, that a better world is possible.
It's a powerful message, and I think it's especially relevant today with all the challenges we're facing.
It is. Ashoka reminds us that we can choose peace, we can choose compassion, we can choose to build a better future.
Well said. And that's a wrap on our Ashoka deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey.
It's been my pleasure. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep striving to make the world a better place.
And until next time, keep diving deep.
And until next time, keep diving deep.